Or should I say good morning?
Actually, yes, and I'll be brief both in recognition of the hour and in terms of what has been said already. Generally, I do not rise to speak on a matter that I may not be as well versed on as maybe others, and whether something has been said maybe more than once already this evening. And I think both of those areas qualify. However, on balance, given the work that I've done in the last several days to learn as much as I can about one aspect of this bill, in particular, I would be disappointed in myself if I did not voice my perspective on that. I want to begin by saying I'm rising in support of this legislation. I want to thank Senator Winfield for his amazing patience, and not to speak of the work that he has put in to get us to this point. I want to speak very briefly, Madam President, on Section 41. I know much has been said, and I'm not certain that what I will say here tonight will break any new ground. But I want to speak to the fact that this section, in my opinion, has the potential to have as much of an effect on behavior than any other. And in my readings over the last several days, what I've learned, and I think most people, and maybe most in this chamber, may not know, the degree in which the federal Supreme Court in particular, and our courts in Connecticut, for following different reasoning, but ending up in the same place, has resulted in virtually blanket immunity in the area of governmental immunity here in Connecticut and qualified immunity nationally. And any time as humans that we have a belief, accurate or otherwise, that we are immune from responsibility for our actions. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that the vast majority of police officers, those of whom I have known personally in Hartford and Wethersfield, the two towns that I represent, many that I went to high school with who went on to become Hartford police officers, now retired. I have great respect for the profession, but we're all human. We're all human. In an instance where in the reasoning at the federal level that has been described, and in the state level, our Supreme Court and other courts that have described the reasoning behind the granting of, whether it be a summary judgment or otherwise, immunity, that has gone so far afield, in my opinion, so far afield in terms of what may have been originally intended either in case law at the federal level or in statute in terms of what this legislature, previous legislatures enacted, that it doesn't represent what was intended, but much more importantly, does not provide a balance in this very important area of seeking redress for an action that, in the eyes of a reasonable person, a reasonable police officer, is not appropriate. And that's where we stand today, Senator Winfield. That's where we stand today, is we have a situation, case after case at the federal level, case after case at the state level, where the family of a deceased victim or the individual, him or herself, brings an action seeking redress in a civil case, not in a criminal side, in a civil case, which is for damages, is not able to get their day in court to even be heard. Doesn't mean they win. Doesn't mean that police officer is ultimately liable. Just to have a day in court. In the fact pattern of many of these cases, I am absolutely convinced if most people in this chamber and most people watching right now were to hear these individual cases, they would certainly say there's what Senator Winfield has put before this chamber tonight is fair. Is fair. And that's all this does, is provide fairness. I'll just say, Madam President, that the aspect, and it was mentioned here at least once here tonight, but I think it bears repeating. A article written by a law school professor, Daniel Epps, who stated that if George, the police officer, Chauvin, I believe is how it's pronounced, who put his knee on the neck of George Floyd for nearly 9 minutes, leading to his death, if he's ultimately convicted of murder, and I haven't found or heard from anyone, including any police officer who hasn't, and by the way, I'd venture to guess that many police officers in this state and in this country would love to have a few minutes with Mr. Chauvin in terms of what that individual has done and damage to the honorable profession of policing in this country. But that's another story. If this person were found guilty of murder of George Floyd, the likelihood that the family of George Floyd, even being able to bring a case in civil court to be heard, to put on testimony, to make an argument, would not be realized because, as was stated now, this, if it were brought in federal court, because no similar case of an individual, an officer having his knee on the neck of an individual that led to his death had not been previously adjudicated, that would qualify that officer for qualified immunity. I think most people, reasonable or not, would say there's something wrong about that. But that's how far we've gone in this country, how the Supreme Court of this country, and they just recently, this past month, chose not to hear one of 10 cases that were brought on qualified immunity. To not hear one, essentially saying we stand by the current policy of qualified immunity. After George Floyd, after so many other cases, they still said we're not going to hear any of these cases. And just last month in Connecticut, the Connecticut Supreme Court declined to hear a matter involving governmental immunity, involving a police officer in this state in a chase of 3 young people in a car that led to the death in the back seat of a 15-year-old. And the court decided that, again, governmental immunity stands. And the mother of that young man will never get her day in court to have that matter heard by a jury. Not find that officer liable, but to have the opportunity to present that case before a jury. That's been denied as well. So, Madam President, I've gone on longer than I intended, but I believe strongly that this particular section has the potential, whether it's on the part of officers or whether it's on part of the municipality that ultimately would be financially liable, to do some soul searching, in terms of the people who are out on the street. Those bad apples have been described tonight, that small percentage of people. But if you're on the receiving end of that small percentage, the power that that officer has to affect your life or your loved one's life, to have this legislation possibly have a positive effect in that is well worth it and well worth my vote. Thank you, Madam President.